Hey, Patrick.
Hey, how you doing, Michael J?
I am doing so well. I mean, as a fan of Standard, Double Grand Prix again is like an embarrassment of riches.
Oh, yeah. And the format has evolved quite a bit. Like, I mean, it's so alien. Like, thinking back to the early days of the format where, you know, black, white History of Benalia decks were taking down Llanowar Elf into Lyra Dawnbringer decks with Winding Constrictor on the horizon.
Oh, my gosh.
Like, we've come a long way, and it's kind of become, even though there's like 12 different decks, this is kind of wild. There's almost no deck that isn't built around one of the three pillars of Standard.
So
let's see if you're, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. The three pillars of Standard. Can I get a Teferi Hero of Dominaria for 5, Patrick?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is one.
Let me see if I got another one. I'm gonna downgrade this by 2 and go for a Goblin Chain Whirler for 3.
Also correct.
All right. Last one seems tough. I don't know. Can I get a Llanowar Elves for 1?
No.
Not
even remotely. Yeah. See, here's the thing. Llanowar Elves has completely fallen off the map. The number of decks with Llanowar Elves is so small. So they're so few and far between. The third pillar is weirdly Torrential Gearhulk / the Scarab God.
Oh,
every single deck has either Teferi, Goblin Chain Whirler, or Torrential Gearhulk and the Scarab God, or a combination of those.
Yeah.
So the SCG Open, the SCG team tournament, 100% of the day 2 decks played by, that were like more than the like archetypes that had more than one pilot were built around one of those 3. The top 8 of Connecticut, those 3. The top 8 of LA, mostly those 3, with the notable exception of a Llanowar Elf deck sneaking in there. You know, like the green-black Constrictor deck. And then also the exception of Chris Ferber's white-blue Godpharaoh's Gift deck, which despite being Teferi's colors has no Teferi.
What?
But yeah, I know. But it's it's Godpharaoh's Gift. You know, it's a lot more low to the ground. But the amount, like, we've been seeing consistently day 2 of like every Grand Prix and every Open, and in the top 8s and the top 16s, it's more than 50% Goblin Chain Whirler, and then like 40-something% split between Torrential Gearhulk, the Scarab God, you know, on one side, and Teferi on the other.
And Teferi can sometimes be Teferi, Torrential Gearhulk, and in fact can sometimes be Teferi and the Scarab God, right?
Right.
And sometimes all 3, right? Right.
So the format is roughly 50% Goblin Chain, 51% Goblin Chain Whirler, 47% blue decks built around those cards, and then 2% Llanowar Elf.
Well, the best deck has then got to be like a deck, a red based deck with all the correct dual lands to go with Goblin Chain Whirler and Torrential Gearhulk, right? That's got to be the best strategy.
Well, dude, get the Scarab God and Teferi in there?
I mean, it probably makes the mana better to get the Scarab God in there. I'm not sure about Teferi. All 4 seems tough to me. But I think we get 3 of the 4 as long as one of those 3 was Torrential Gearhulk.
Well, 2 of them come together. The Scarab God and Torrential Gearhulk, or Torrential Gearhulk. Basically, out of the Scarab God, Torrential Gearhulk, and Teferi, very frequently the Scarab God and Torrential Gearhulk, you know, like everybody's got at least one of those 2 if they don't have Teferi or Chain Whirler. But I actually like Grixis, which gets to play, both the Scarab God and Torrential Gearhulk. And we saw a pretty wild development in the advance of Grixis this weekend. Mitchell Tamblin actually kind of, taking Grixis energy to the next level with a little bit more proactive tap out style. Just a little bit wild to just play 12 4-cost cards. But I guess, if you can, if all your 4s are just that good. Wow. And it sounds so crazy, but he actually Chandra for Chandra and Rekindling Phoenix to be the innovative, crazy additions, he's got all the sick 4s.
I mean, he's got 4 copies of Vraska's Contempt, so who am I to complain? But I mean, he's even got Commit. That's a 4, right?
Yeah, that's one that's kind of wild to me. When you've only got 1 Torrential Gearhulk and you've already got 11 other 4s, I think I would have to. I think I'd have to pass on the Commit. I think I'd play like an extra Supreme Will or something.
Yeah, I mean, this deck, you're right. It is very differently biased than a lot of the decks we've seen before. Like, I was just talking recently about how I like Doomfall, but I don't know if I like Doomfall enough to play main deck in a 3-colored control deck.
Oh, I do. Yeah. I still do. I still think you do. I think Doomfall, first of all, your 3s are just nowhere near as good as your 4s. And you've got room on the curve. But second of all, I think that, when the format is basically just split between the red decks and the blue decks, Doomfall's respectable in small numbers against both. Being able to hit Rekindling Phoenix or Hazaret while also being able to go after Teferi or the Scarab God, it's not like it's like the most efficient thing in the world, but I think that Doomfall in small numbers this is a good time for it.
You can go against the Scarab God high or low with Doomfall, which I kind of like that. And this deck has enough point removal with the 1 Fatal Push, 3 of Braids, and the
Sweltering Suns.
Yeah, you can set the board up well enough. I think that you can Doomfall Hazaret fairly respectably, and if you can Doomfall Hazaret without actually taking a hit from Hazaret, that's got to be pretty good.
One of the nice things about this deck is that it's got a little bit of the whole Jushi blue thing going, where the mono blue Kamigawa block deck that you basically broke that format with. I mean, not Kamigawa, but the standard, right around that time.
Oh, I remember that deck well.
Where the whole theory is that, we can't solve every problem in the world, but we're just going to play Moloku, and then we're going to play Kaiga, and I bet that whatever they do isn't going to be that good.
Yeah, it's not as good as what you play that turn. That's the theory.
And this deck is aspiring to do that with Nigobolas the Ravager, the Scarab God, Torrential Gearhulk, Rekindling Phoenix, Chandra Torch of Defiance, Liliana Dust Majesty. The plan is just play really bomb-ass stuff, really, really good stuff that is better than whatever they're going to do. And instead of Jushi Apprentice taking a little bit of heat to, help reduce the removal that's pointed at Moloku and Kaiga, you've got Glint Sleeve Siphoner. And in fact, it keeps going. On turn 3, what do you think of this use of Whirler Virtuoso and an Isareth the Awakener instead of the usual second and third copy of Champion of Wits?
Yeah, well, Whirler Virtuoso is so cool. I mean, that's a very difficult card to play against sometimes, right? So obviously you can't go too wide with Whirler Virtuoso if you're playing against, say, Goblin Chain Whirler. But if you're playing against blue-white and you're able to resolve the Whirler Virtuoso, it's very bedeviling for them, I think. Right? It's this single threat that can make more cards, and then sometimes you're in the situation do I really want to settle into these tokens? That could be a question that you ask yourself. I think it's really, really impressive in some matchups. I mean, obviously it used to be the death knell for beatdown decks. Not anymore, but Isareth the Awakener is, I think this is the first big event, top 8, we've seen Isareth appear.
Yeah.
I mean, they just don't make a gnarled mass like they used to. This one is is very good relative to 3/3 trained Armadon,
which is the gold standard.
Okay.
But I don't know. I mean, this card is super dope. I would love if this is really actually that sweet, but doesn't it just seem like there's just abrades and lightning strikes all over the place, and like against even if you play against the blue decks, like they just have stuff like Essence Scatter, and they can even catch back up with Settle the Wreckage or Fumigate. I mean,
so here's the thing about Isserith. There are some decks that are removal poor. Now, obviously, if you're playing against one of the Goblin Chain Whirler decks or either like the blue-black type or Esper decks, those decks have a ton of spot removal. The blue-white, I mean, the Teferi decks, once Isserith becomes tapped, a lot of things can happen to Isserith that wouldn't happen if it weren't tapped, but it has to tap in order to do its mischief, right? And the blue-white decks can interact with it a variety of ways once it becomes tapped. But here's the thing. It's got Death Touch, and B, there are decks that are removal poor. Like, I understand they're not making top 8s in these events, but, green Stompy, green-blue Stompy, mid-range green decks.
You think the green decks, the way to beat the green decks is with a 3/3 Death Touch?
No, I think that you can trade with them, though, and that, like, any trades that you get in with them early on, because those decks are fairly... It depends. Obviously, if they're, like, the 187 8X Explore deck, they have a ton of progressive card advantage, but, like, just aggro decks or mid-range decks, white creature decks, like, those decks don't... Like, once you get past trading with them, like, an unchecked Issereth is going to bury them, I think. Like, but that's fairly niche.
But an unchecked, the Scarab God is going to bury them.
Yeah, but Issereth, I don't know, comes out on turn 3.
Color me skeptical. Super cool. It wouldn't be my 61st card.
I mean, here's the thing about this.
Which, incidentally, dude, I don't think you can play 61 cards in a deck like this. I think you want to draw Vraska's Contempt as much as you can.
Yeah, so I actually hadn't noticed that this deck were 61 cards before you mentioned it. I agree with you now. Separately, I mean, the Scarab God is so powerful, especially when you have all these creatures that have enters the battlefield abilities like Nicol Bolas the Ravager or Torrential Gearhulk. I mean... Champion of Wits, like the Scarab God's ability, you can do it a lot of different times. It gets the triggers whenever. You can do timing tricks so that you can do your scry draining more efficiently. I agree with you that the Scarab God is a superior graveyard manipulation card to Isserith the Awakener, despite their delta in casting cost. Actually, especially mid-game, Isserith, it's not like you're getting a huge discount, right, once Isserith is going.
No, you have to pay.
Yeah, Scarab God's always 4. And
this deck's got. I mean, 4, 5, and 6. Like, and if you get back Champion of Wits, it's like you're getting 7 worth of value.
Well, like maybe, I don't know. Maybe if the deck had more Champion of Wits type action, which it doesn't, right? It only has the.
Well, but the tough part about Champion of Wits is that stacking up lots of Champion of Wits is tough when you already have a bunch of Nicol Bolas also. Like, they are all kind of eating up your 7 cost on the curve, right? Like, how many 7s can you really play? That's one of the things I liked about this list is that de-emphasize, like, going a little easier on the Nicol Bolas Champion of Wits. Now, that said, I think you can play 5. I don't think you want to play 6 of that stuff, though. And I wouldn't hate only playing 4.
So here's the thing. Commit to Memory is actually kind of counterproductive here, isn't it?
Yeah, but to me that's just like snap it off as the 61st card to cut. Just because it's the 12th 4, and it doesn't really... It like Nicol Bolas, the Scarab God, Liliana, Champion of Wits, Isserith. You don't want to use it. Cut to ribbons. Like,
yeah.
You just don't...
It doesn't make any sense.
Dude, I like the Sweltering Suns, though.
The 1?
Yeah, the 1+1. Yeah, I like Sweltering Suns here because I think it's kind of nice taking advantage of his de-emphasizing of the 4s. Of the 3s. And what's important to note is how big, and now maybe it was just LA. I mean, it was true everywhere to a degree, but maybe, actually even more so in Providence. But the red decks definitely had it was a really, really big weekend for the wizard style fast aggro. Even though red-black, the more traditional style, was almost 3 times as popular, like 2.5 times as popular as the wizard lightning sort of super low to the ground fast version. The wizard lightning deck, like the wizard style, actually put up more big finishes.
Yeah, 3 copies of that deck in the top 8 on the East Coast last weekend. I think that deck is shockingly difficult to play against, given how simple the cards are. I played against it a lot this past weekend on this past week on Mitgo, which is not surprising because it's clearly jumped up in popularity relative to where it was before, which was not nearly as popular as the incumbent red decks. But it just puts a ton of pressure on you, and it has like a surprising amount of staying power, in part because the land count is so low, right? So like even if you're not like, oh, Flame of Kel, draw 2 cards, like you just draw more gas. Like a lot of games I got stabilized like relatively low, like at 6 or something, and just lose off the top of their deck. I think like this deck it's like, you look at when you first saw Viashino Pyromancer, you probably didn't discount it as like, all right, this card is unplayable, but it probably wasn't that exciting to you the first time you saw it, right? Like I was just like, oh, this seems kind of
very unassuming.
But it's like
I told you though. I mean, that's
fine.
Go upstairs. Dude, it's like Snapcaster Mage, except you don't even have to pay for the shock.
It is. That's a great comparison. It's like a discounted Snapcaster Mage, and it's just fine. And the other thing is like, if you're playing a deck that's got a limited amount of interactive cards, like here's a deck and its removal is just like Hostage Taker and Vraska's Contempt or something. Like the idea that you would Vraska's Contempt a Viashino Pyromancer, while correct, is jarring, right? Like it's like this is not what I signed up for when I put this card in my deck, I think is the thing that you're thinking there.
The Pyromancer definitely lines up well. He gets the best of it against Vraska's Contempt. I don't know if you noticed, but Reckless Rage out of the sideboard is kind of a interesting new addition. Like Reckless Rage, so Cut to Ribbons, which some of the players used. Cut to Ribbons has been the more traditional way to deal with stuff like Steel Leaf Paladin. But Bulan Zhang played 2 copies of Reckless Rage out of the sideboard, which takes on an interesting, it's a little interesting when you notice he also sideboards in 2 Blood Rage Brawlers and another Hazret the Fervent. And then main deck, he's obviously got 4 Chain Whirlers, 2 Hazret the Fervent, and then a couple sweet ones. Soulscar Mage is kind of fun with Reckless Rage. Like it grows just right out of the way, and then also Fanatical Firebrand. With Fanatical Firebrand, with the Reckless Rage on the stack, you can use the Fanatical Firebrand's ability.
So you just like you minimize the back. I mean, you still lose the Firebrand, right? But you minimize the damage.
Well, hopefully, you take down the Llanowar Elf and the Steel Leaf Paladin.
Yeah, that's I guess 2 for 2. That's all right. So Bolin Zhang was just the super profligate rich guy with 20 lands, how greedy, and 4 copies of Flame of Keld in his build.
Well, you got to remember, like Christopher Stitzen, who played only 19, had 2 mountains in the sideboard, so he could get ahead if he had to get,
What's the most lands you've played in a sideboard in a standard deck?
The most land that I've played in the sideboard of a standard deck. I'm trying to think if it's more than 3.
I've done 2 multiple times.
No. I've done a lot more than 3. Hold on. The mono blue deck. Oh yeah. No. I think I might have had 4. 4 in the back in the Tempest era. But anyway.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. 4 Wastelands. Oh, did you have the 4 Wastelands and 2 Maze of Shadows in the sideboard once?
Right.
That's 6. Oh, yes. I've never gone 6. Oh.
Yes.
Maze of Shadows. Oh. Yeah, that was some good technology, man. Hats off to y'all. Yeah, but 2 is a lot, I think. I mean, I love sideboarding land. I think people often raise their eyebrow when you sideboard any number of land, but I've gone 3. I think I did like an extra Urborg before, back when the rules were different, like your Urborg would kill their Urborg. I've done an extra Urborg and some Academy ruins before, but never 6 like you. I think 2 in a deck like this is very, very... That's bold.
So this Wizard's Lightning sort of trend, so low to the ground, one of the things that I think is kind of interesting about this is how much not all the same cards that are good against the traditional red-black Chain Whirler decks, they're not all the same. Like, not all the same cards are good against this Wizard deck. And so, like, I think sometimes they get lumped together, but they actually play out like quite differently.
I agree. I mean, it is extraordinary. Like I said, it's very difficult to play against. I lost a match last weekend where my opponent just like played out Vance's blasting cannons out of the side, and I was just like, "Oh, that's cool." And then did the play 3 spells in a turn, and then chose not to transform it, which I actually thought was crazy. He literally just chose not to transform it, and I don't know, he defeated me handily. I just had like all my like kill a small thing cards in my deck, and he was just like nug you for 3, like nug you for 3, nug you for 3. You know, like draw extra cards. So I feel like it's I wouldn't go so far as to say it was like a transformative sideboard, but it certainly put his deck into a completely different zone than where my sideboard cards put me for interacting with his main deck of like tiny 1 and 2 casting cost haste creatures.
Yeah, and that's such a important sideboarding strategy, you know, like being able to audible, you know, being able to at the, you know, it's you're up on the line, you can tell what kind of defense you're going to be up against and have to change your offense to go a little bit different of a direction, you know, run a different play. And if your opponent's going to have defense that is able to stop your you know, your cheap threats, your low to the ground threats, switching into sort of a durable card advantage engine that lets you grind them out might be just what the doctor ordered.
Yeah, so last week we talked about that Sultai deck from Brussels, which had the Wild Growth Walkers and the Explore guys. So, you know, you use 1/3 guys for 2 that are good blockers against aggro red, and you can gain a ton of life, and they get Tarmogoyf sized. In his top 8 interview, he said one of the reasons he played the deck was because it had such a robust matchup against red decks. And he must have been talking about the red decks from, you know, like black-red or kind of the Pro Tour type red decks. Because I played that matchup multiple times against the Wizards deck this week. And I even played with Vraska's Contempt, like I said I would, instead of a 5 casting cost control magic. And it matchup did not seem close to me. Like, I just got bowled over with the walkers in my deck. And I was just like, this card is going to destroy. And he's like, no, that card died before it ever gained a single life every single time.
I think Vivian Reed Duke is just not as good against the Viashino Pyromancer, Earthshaker Kenra sort of approach as it is against, you know, like Glorybringer and Rekindling Phoenix.
Yeah, I mean, that was really, really... It's like you were saying, we say like red, even in standard, you can talk about probably 3 different red decks that are distinct from one another. And I mean, the trend is obviously towards this one. I wonder what the sustainability of this is relative to like soulless black red.
Because I think that soulless black red is like, it's like impossible to like completely hate out. Whereas I think if you want, you can get percentage against this wizard deck. You can get serious percentage if you try.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you're just, like, all fatal pushing and great blockers and going for speed and instantaneous card advantage, you can keep pace, I think. Or actually maybe sweepers. Sweepers and life gain might be great against them.
Here's a funny little perspective. Dude, when was the last time Karn Cyanoverza appeared in the top 8 of any major tournament?
Did it appear this week?
Nah.
It wasn't an Ephros deck?
Was it?
Yeah, it did. 1 copy.
Oh.
1 copy.
Okay. You win this round.
This week is the answer, Patrick.
Okay, there we go. Actually, there's a different control deck, though, on the other side, wanted to mention, over in Providence. But kind of setting it up, if you recall last week, Esper had a real breakout weekend. And I don't think it's just because of control masters like Dazani and Wafo piloting it. I think for the weekend it was like a really good call, but the tricky part, though, is that with the green decks basically falling off the map this week, there was a lot more incentive to just stick to 2 colors, either white-blue or white-black. And, without question, this week we saw a lot of blue-black control and blue-white control taking what was formerly Esper Control's sort of real estate in the format. And while blue-white control was the more popular way to actually play control, and blue-black was more often the mid-range decks that are basically Grixis decks without the burn, or Bolas, Andrew Cuneo switched it on him, went retro, and brought back old-school blue-black control that was basically the Esper deck without Teferi. Just win with 4 Gear Hulks and the Scarab God, like Josh Utterlayton back at the
Nationals last year.
Right.
I mean,
the Mikko Championship, right.
I mean, this deck is... bringing back Search for Escanta. I mean, the speed of the format has been so interesting that we see a ton of main deck Argios Bloodfast instead of Search for Escanta in decks that can play either. And so Cuneo bringing back Search for Escanta in the main deck also brings back Search for Escanta's buddies, right? So, 4 Hieroglyphic Illumination in the main deck and 3 Censor. I mean,
plus 2 Glimmer of Genius,
Well, I'm just saying... Glimmer's even if people play it as a 2 of an approach or whatever, that kind of never left. But going to 4 Hieroglyphic Illumination in addition to the Glimmers is that's search fuel, right? That's the subtext there, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's also just low opportunity cost. You want to have a bunch of card advantage. I just think it's interesting the use of, obviously Vraska's Contempt and Fatal Push are quote unquote the good ones. But he's not playing any of the other ones. No Cast Down, no Never to Return, nothing. He's just unwilling to settle. No Moment of Craving. Literally just play the good ones, and then beyond that, it's just counterspells.
He's got an Essence Extraction in his sideboard and 1 Bantu's Last Reckoning.
Right, and even that's low. And I think more importantly, he's got 2 Infernal Reckonings. I think Infernal Reckoning has been just absolutely stellar. And we're at the spot now where even though it started in Blue, Black, and Esper, even Grixis decks are incorporating it some of the time now. Infernal Reckoning is basically the black Magma Spray. It's a little bit more narrow, of course, right? It doesn't go after the wizard decks. And so that's a definite hit. But the fact that you can kill a Scrap Heap Scrounger and also gain 2 life in your blue-black deck and actually have it exiled, that's fantastic. And, it also goes after Heart of Kirin. It's not like Heart of Kirin is trivial to remove. It's...
I think it's one of the rough cards to deal with if it's already resolved, right? If it's going, you're like, oh, maybe I'll try to push this, but in the wrong deck, they might have a way to stop your push.
Yeah, it hits hard.
Yeah,
it hits hard. So I think Infernal Reckoning is definitely a real respectable form of interaction. I'm not quite at the spot of actually sticking it in the red decks. Magma Spray is just too versatile for its flexibility against these wizard decks, but Infernal Reckonings are showing up everywhere now. What do you think about the use of sort of no backup victory conditions beyond, I guess, arguably low to the ground ones like Walking Ballista, Deadeye Tracker, Baral, Chief of Compliance, and to a degree Vizier of Many Faces? Like, often we see these kinds of decks have big, heavy hitters, one or two real big guns.
Well,
Andrew's going without that.
I think Andrew's probably going for, like, in that spot, if he's maybe likely to put in Argyle's Bloodfast. Like, I think that they bring in other different weird heavy hitters against decks that have, like, a good way to win attrition wars against a small number of threats, or, like, some kind of Lost Legacy, something like that can deal with, like, a narrow band of powerful threats. And instead he's just, I think, choosing to go with positional advantage or card advantage, and then, if I keep one, that's what I'm going to win with, because I have so many counter spells, and he's playing like 26 lands. I think he's just going to try to get ahead with the regular stuff, right? Like, look, who are you fighting against? Guys that have giant uncounterable dinosaurs? Vizier of Many Faces is good against that. I don't think people play a lot of Lost Legacies. Maybe I'm wrong. And what about playing against, like, an excess of card advantage? I'm sorry, excess of creature removal. Like, just I have more Vraska's Contempts than you have threats. Maybe he can beat that with a combination of Argyle's Bloodfast and Search for Iskanta. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Especially, Andrew's got 4 Field of Ruin, so he's in a good position to contend with somebody else.
Great point.
Those similar, sources of card advantage, and then he just waits until he's just so far ahead. He's like, all right, now I'm going to start deploying my 2-for-1 giant guys, or I'm going to cast Scarab God with 2 counter spells open. I think that's probably what he's going for. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Being able to consistently win the Field of Ruin, Search for Iskanta, that's sort of that particular battle, that dynamic. There's a different blue-black deck in the top 8 though, that really caught my eye. Edgar Magalhaes, blue-black, apologies on the name, but his blue-black deck goes a little bit different. Like, it's a little bit of an evolution. Like Brendan DeCandio put up another big finish with the same style of blue-black that people have been using for quite a bit. But this build, so first of all, abandoning Liliana Death's Majesty, right? Like, moving away from Liliana Death's Majesty, and instead incorporating the Eldest Reborn and a main deck Glamour of Genius. Go ahead. Yeah.
I just didn't think I was going to see the day where there were more of the Eldest Reborns on 5 than there were Lyra Dawnbringers in Standard. I think that we're at that point now.
Yeah. I think so too.
I think that it's super plausible that we're going to be seeing decks that have 4 of the Eldest Reborn. Not because the Eldest Reborn is just the sickest 5 you can play, like sicker than Liliana, sicker than Lyra Dawnbringer, but because it's so positionally good against other people who have great threats. It's like a 3-for-1 by itself, and it's very difficult to interact with. Like, you can play like one of these awesome, Planeswalkers or giant, 5/5 Angels or whatever, and somebody's gonna send a Vraska's Contempt at it. The Eldest Reborn, they kind of have to send 3 Vraska's Contempts at it, and that, I think, is and by the way, they could just be getting your best thing. That's the thing that's so compelling. And when you have like a lot of like Essence Scatters and counter spells and cast downs, like, it's really the case that you can tune the board to your advantage when you land this. Like, you imagine like Glintsleeve Siphoner, Champion of Wits, Eldest Reborn, Torrential Gearhulk is your curve on things that you cast on your own turn. Like, that's a lot of, like, every single card is building an advantage over the previous cards.
Well, I actually think Doomfall is a more exciting turn 3 play than Champion of Wits. I think that the ability to play Doomfall to kind of clear the path is it's a great way to set up the Eldest Reborn. Because like your opponent having to discard a card to the Eldest Reborn hurts them more if you've already stripped their hand a little bit. Like if their hand is getting smaller, they're going to be even more pinched on cards.
So there was a segment in Next Level Deck Building. I don't know if you've heard of that book, Next Level Deck Building.
I'm familiar, yeah.
about different archetypes, like 16 or so different archetypes of decks that one might play. And there's a segment on non-blue control decks. And here's the thing: non-blue control decks aren't always bad, right? So there are formats.
They're also not always not blue.
That's that. Well, both of those statements are true-ish, but they're not always bad, allegedly. But like a format like this, where you can, like, let's say you're playing I'm just going to be like a black-white control deck, right? So there was a stretch where black-white control was the control deck you'd play in Standard, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Like, I got the Sorin at the top end, and we're killing so many creatures, and why would you play blue? We can play our 4/4 Angel and then our Sorin, and But if you have a format like this one, where you're not playing blue, and they could literally go like, fix my hand, duress your Planeswalker Eldest Reborn, and you can't stop them with a permission spell, you're cooked, right?
I don't know. I think the blue decks would annihilate the white-black deck you're describing.
No, that... I think we're saying the same thing, right? Like, if you're not blue, right, you can't stop them from, like, duressing your Vraska or whatever, and then Eldest Reborning you, and just beating you with card advantage, and then beating you with
I see, thing. Yeah.
Like, you would demolish somebody who's a non-blue control deck. So I don't think it's even viable, right? Like, there was a time not that long ago, in the last, like, 3 or 5 months, where I thought that, like, maybe like a very removal-heavy Mardu deck might be one of the best decks in Standard, right? We have so many flip enchantments that you can play, and high-end, the high-end like Sunbird's Invocations and stuff like that. Like, look at all the Jame Day tomes we can play. I think you would get thrashed by the kind of advantage that the combination of duress, card advantage, and the Eldest Reborn can put together for a deck with even like light interaction and light permission like this deck could do.
Yeah, maybe. I do wonder about this deck's use of its light permission, though. 3 Essence Scatter, 1 Supreme Will, and if you squint your eyes, 1 Commit Memory. Like, loading up on Essence Scatters and then also playing 4 Vraska's Contempt and 4 Fatal Push and 2 Cast Down and 3 Doomfall and the Eldest Reborn. Isn't this just like just so much removal?
I think that one of the things that you can do with this deck that is good, and I hope this is answering your question, but I'm just kind of like contextualizing it relative to green decks that have a lot of the same kinds of cards, even though obviously they're green instead of blue. But like, I'm going to cast a card to get a little advantage out of it, but I still have a guy. Is that ultimately the deck is super customizable, right? So you've got these cards like Essence Scatter, which aren't very good against approach. Fatal Push is not very good against approach, but you can bring in out of your sideboard like a ton of cards that are meaningful against the opponent. And you can fix your hand somewhat with these Champion of Wits in the main deck. I think that's where it's coming from. But you could also, against like a red deck, you can become way, way better defensively on the board by like bringing in Yahenni's expertise instead of slow cards like Arguel's Bloodfest. Like, you would never is a strong word, because like sometimes you would cast it and win, but it's not super exciting to cast the Eldest Reborn against like this Rush Red deck.
No, it's not. No, I mean if you time it just right and you kill a Hazoret, good for you.
Yeah, but they're not even going to have a card to discard off of Chapter 2, right? Like, that's right. This is not going to happen. You're going to take 3.
No, yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think the 3 Champion of Wits is like a great point. You can play a little bit more removal if you're planning on doing a little card filtering. And maybe you get more mileage out of your Arguel's Bloodfast when you have just so much cheap removal and interaction. You're just trying to stall things out a little bit and then win with your card advantage coming from fewer cards, but more from those cards.
Do you think this deck has enough against, like, a dedicated blue-white approach deck after sideboarding?
You keep bringing up blue-white approach.
I mean...
Is it a blue-white approach? Yeah,
it won last week, and it put up another top 8 this week.
Yeah.
Like, you got to land that Doomfall really, really precisely in game 1, because otherwise you have so few things that matter. Like, you can get you could just like get a bunch of 2-for-1s and it's just completely irrelevant against them. Right? You got to be able to lock down that game. There's all of 1 commit to memory and 1 supreme will maybe and 3 doomfalls that are going to stop you from losing on the spot. That's what I see in game 1. So I'm just wondering if bringing in 2 negates and 3 duresses is going to get you there.
See, I still like Lost Legacy. I play Lost Legacy in Grixis.
Oh, I love Lost Legacy. I think that finding decks that can cast Lost Legacy is good. I mean, whether you're going for Approach or going for Teferi, I think...
I'm naming Teferi.
I typically name Teferi first, yeah. But I also never play 1 Lost Legacy. Right?
See, I usually play 1, but whatever. Yeah. I think the going after Teferi, these decks are just so reliant. I wonder about the divide between blue-black and Grixis. Like, they're kind of the same deck, right? Like, the Glint Sleeve Siphoner style of each, they're kind of the same deck.
See, I don't know. I think the blue-black deck is like a cleaner green deck, and that the red deck is like the true Grixis deck. Like, the red deck is about, like, playing Bolas. Right, that's a big difference.
Not really. I don't know. It's just a good card, but instead of Nico Bolas, you could just play something else. You know, like you play the Eldest Reborn or Argol's Bloodfast or whatever. You know, like okay, so it starts with Harness Lightning is the one that, as long as you're not playing Harness Lightning and Grixis, fine. But like, who would Harness Lightning even be good against anymore? Right? Like, I think its time has kind of passed. And once you, like, the more that you cut the red removal to play more black removal, the more you got to really look at yourself and wonder if you're getting enough mileage out of that Nico Bolas to be worth it. I still think it is, but I think there's a really good case to be made for playing with 18 untapped land.
I think that the really big card that you're getting out of red, even outside of the threats. Like, obviously, not everybody's going to be a maniac like Mitchell Tamblyn and play Rekindling Phoenix in their main deck and sideboard in their Grixis deck, right? That's an unusual step, and maybe it's going to end up being right. But in addition to Glorybringer, which is obviously a pretty compelling card, I think that just the presence of a Braid in the main deck is a big deal, right? The ability to interact a little bit more efficiently against, a variety of things like Heart of Kirin, or like weirdo decks that have like an artifact that's going to beat you, right? Like, there are combo decks that have artifacts that are going to beat you, right? There are people who are worrying things, and they're not necessarily the ones who are winning the tournaments right now, but part of the reason that the Grixis decks are going to get through them is because they can deal with a resolved permanent that might otherwise be an issue.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to sell me on a Braid. That is a really flexible and efficient card. So one of the big advantages of a Braid is sort of the mono blue Aetherflux Reservoir deck.
Orthopterist deck.
Exactly. But kind of petered out a little bit near the end of the tournament. Didn't really put up any big finishes on either coast. Yeah, I mean, do you think that deck's the real deal, or do you think it needs something else?
I think that deck is like a really great example of a glass cannon, which is like, if you're just there, you win a lot of die rolls, you're going first, especially if people don't know what's going on, you're going to win a lot of games. The problem is, if stuff doesn't line up the way that you want it to, and or you're playing against people who have the correct type of flexible answers for your deck, I mean, card for card, your deck is far weaker than most of the decks that are performing at the top end, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, if you have Ornithopter, and if your deck has Ornithopter in it, Mox Amber, Renegade Map, and it's not, I mean, Mox Amber can be good, but it's going to be a bad draw a lot of the time.
Yeah, I'm just saying there's a big difference between somebody who could throw in a Braid or even a cast out at your key permanent in the middle of you trying to take a big turn, right? Versus a deck that's going to be like, yeah, I guess that resolves. Like there's just a big difference there. So I think like the presence of cards like Abrade and these decks change things a lot. Like I don't think that kind of deck is so scared of the blue-black deck's ability to have like one Supreme Will or something, no matter how many cards they drew with their Glintsleeve Siphoner on turn 2. They're just not drawing meaningful interaction. So if they don't finish the game out, right, you're just going to be able to brute force your way through with either side.
A paradoxical outcome. Yeah, like that's the big one.
Yeah, I mean you're just going to have some engine card that is it's just gonna like shove them down the stairs, right? They really need
intense.
Yeah, I mean, like, I drew 3 extra cards with Glintsleeve Siphoner. I'm like, oh, cool. They were all fatal pushes. Okay, I'm not losing to that. Like that, my deck doesn't lose to that, right? So that's where the presence of a card like Abrade makes a meaningful difference between Grixis and just straight blue black.
Yeah, isn't it going to be enough though once you include the duresses also? Like, can't you just go after them with duresses and doomfalls?
I think that is really good if you're clocking them. Like, if you've got, like, a solid clock and you can beat them in, like, 3 swings, then more power to you. But, you've seen it. We've all seen it. Like, all right, duress your key card, untap, all right, I rip the key card, go. All right, doomfall you, or all right, I rip the other key card, you're dead. Like, it's different if you can only deal with it in their hand versus dealing with it when it's on the board and dealing with it, using permission. I mean, It's good. It's great if you've got like a 4/4 to kill them with, but if you've got like a 2/1 to kill them with, a little less great. But speaking of differences, I was checking out Ephro's deck. The Turbo Fog deck made a small resurgence in the hands of outstanding Magic the Gathering player Eric Froelich.
Yep.
And I noticed a lot. What do you think about these Sun Petal Groves and irrigated farmlands and scattered groves that he's got going on? These little white green and blue white dual lands he's got there.
So there's the Soul Nova in the sideboard, right? Like having access to the sweeper action. That's part of the equation. It might also just be a certain amount of just, having cycling lands.
Yeah.
A little extra card flow.
I think I was just really thinking about settling the wreckage in Game 1, which is not, like, unheard of, right? But people, when you're playing against, like, the Turbo Fog deck and there's 4 Haze of Pollen here and he's only got 3 Root Snare, I think that people will approach the game differently if they think that you're just going to fog their guys and if they realize that you're going to kill all their guys. I think that's something that is a little bit of a wrinkle here that we didn't see, at least in all the decks from the Pro Tour.
Settle the Wreckage is kind of just a great card, so can't be mad at that,
No, I like the fact that Ephro was able to pilot this thing up, but I don't know.
Dude, I mean, you got to play Teferi anyway, so you do need some white. I mean, it's not like you can't, so, like, how much are you really paying by having a little extra?
That's fair. What do you think about, like... Do you think that turboing Fogs is the right way to go? Because this
definitely
clearly has an awesome endgame engine, right?
Yeah, I think Fogs are.
Fogs is the right way to get there?
Yeah, and actually, if you look over at the Team Open down in Texas, the Third Coast... down in Texas, Jonathan Job played the Bant Nexus sort of fog deck. His team won with the Nexus deck, also playing Settle the Wreckage. So another finish there. Like, it's not like Ephro was the only one putting up a big finish. Great weekend for him, no question. But this deck continues to do well. Like, I think it's definitely looking like it's got some staying power. And I wonder about Mystic Archaeologist, though.
I was looking at the same card. It's hard to imagine a card I would love more.
Isn't that that's a little fancy, right? I mean, it's ambitious at the very least.
You just bring it in against the right fella. Like, some people can't kill it. I was playing this match earlier this week where I was playing against, like, Green Blue Stompy, and I was behind, And then I was just like almost just like conceded into game 2, and I'm like, oh, I'll play this out, right? I just like made the right blocks, and a few turns later, I just came to the conclusion he can't kill any of my stuff. I'm just going to keep blocking, and then eventually I just had an overwhelming advantage because I was playing with the Scarab God, and I was just like, oh wow, some people just can't kill your stuff. Those people. They got to kill you fast. If you do anything to stay alive, at some point you've got a card that has a casting cost or an activation cost of 5, and they look at it and they're like, man, I wish I could kill that. Yes, go ahead and draw or reanimate or whatever awesome thing you've got going on with your permanent. And that's what happens.
Yeah, I mean, particularly after sideboarding, because it's not like you want to keep removal in. And if somebody Vraska's Contempts this instead of one of your Planeswalkers, it's not like they got a good deal on the mana efficiency.
Oh, this is awesome against, like, if you're playing the mirror match or like against blue-white approach, or I mean, I guess it gets thin after that, right? Like,
yeah, no, that's about it. Not just approach though, any Teferi deck, I think. The sideboard plan of both these guys and the Carnage Tyrants. What do you think of that approach as opposed to like Ephro's approach of 1 Lyra Dawnbringer, 2 Manglehorns, a Nezahal Primal Tide, and 3 Baral Chief of Compliance?
Well, I think that Baral Chief of Compliance is the best, right? So we're seeing that card in all kinds of decks, not just the Bant Nexus, but I mean, it's making appearances in the blue-white deck, etc. I think it's really, really good. It's even better, I think, than the Mystic Archaeologist in the situations that we're talking about where you're playing against another control deck and they don't have good point removal. Like, just the fact that you can cast it on turn 2 and then turn 3 you can start glimmering, etc. That's really cool. But in terms of, like, endgame offense, I think that they're very different, right? So Carnage Tyrant costs 6, which is very expensive, much more expensive than Lyra Dawnbringer, which costs 5. Lyra Dawnbringer, you're going to bring in against a red deck, right? And Carnage Tyrant, you're going to bring in against a blue deck. So, I just think they're just vastly different cards. You bring Carnage Tyrant against this like Rush Wizards deck, would you?
No, none of the red decks, just the blue decks.
Yeah, but you wouldn't bring in Lyra Dawnbringer against blue-black control with the
the red deck, just the red decks, not the blue decks.
Yeah, it's the opposite, right? So
I see. Yeah, no, that's fair. Where do you like Cleansing Nova the most?
I don't know. I think that card's just a hedge.
You think it's a little bit of a fumigate, a little bit of a another disenchant type effect.
I mean, I got Novid recently, and I just said to myself, he could have gained 3 life. It was like the extent of it, but I was just like playing as though he might have fumigate, and it was like I was happy that he Novid. I guess there's some decks that just play a ton of enchantments. So maybe it's great if your opponent commits like a ton of Gift of Paradises and a Searcher's Content in play, and you kind of catch them there. That's cool. Are you often in a situation where you want to destroy artifacts and enchantments instead of creatures? I think this is like usually keyed on killing creatures.
Well, yeah, of course, that's the primary thing. But the reason you're giving up the life that you would get if you just played with Fumigate is the added flexibility of playing against these white decks that stack up enchantments.
Yeah. I mean, it's got some juice there, sure. I think it's the same as what we were talking about with the flexibility offered by a Braid, right? Like sometimes you've got a card that just messes up your opponent that people don't always play cards like that.
Yeah. You wouldn't play Vizier of Many Faces in obviously Vizier's a lot better when you're playing like the Scarab God and all the sort of like mid-rangey sort of threats, but is there any chance you're supposed to be playing Vizier of Many Faces in the sideboard of the Nexus of Fate deck?
I don't think so. Like the reason is where's Vizier of Many Faces best, right? When you want to counter a card like Carnage Tyrant, right? Like this card is like extraordinarily difficult for blue decks to deal with. Obviously the blue-white decks have many options for just killing a giant creature or like settling it or something like that, but Vizier of Many Faces is an outstanding answer to Carnage Tyrant, in part because it's also an answer to their next Carnage Tyrant. the Nexus of Fate deck doesn't need that because fogs are insane against Carnage Tyrants. Like, sure, it resolves. Sure, I can't target it. I don't have to. I'm just gonna
that makes sense.
Gain whatever time I need, and Teferi is just constantly going to leave me 2 untapped lands. So
in the space of the green decks, though, they weren't completely off the map. Andrew Beckstrom narrowly missing top 8 with the green Steel Leaf Champion, Ronus the Indomitable type of deck, but notably no Galtas anywhere to be seen in the 75. And then he was playing the style with the light blue splash, 2 commit memory in the main, and then his sideboard 4 negate, 1 spell pierce, and 1 metamorphic alteration.
So no Galtas is interesting because you're curbing off how good your deck can be, right? So I think that a lot of the incentive to playing like the green aggro deck is like I'm gonna get to play Galta, right? So Galta is like relatively cheap to play in my deck, right? But you're cutting off how powerful your deck can be. But I think that it's a very, very sharp metagame choice. Like, imagine the decks we've been discussing. A lot of the time, the red decks can kill your small guys so easily that, like, it's just going to be stuck in your hand. The same is true for, like, the Fatal Push decks. And, in fact, Galta's not that impressive against Turbo Fog, right? It doesn't matter how big it is. So, right. I think just, like, switching that out for some of the blue cards, it's actually very, very sharp. And, I mean, I don't know, what's the nut draw you're looking for against some of these decks? Like, you're just asking them to have no interaction?
Well, I don't think it's about the nut draw here. I think it's just a bunch of reliable threats. Like you're just playing out lots of proactive, reliable threats.
Yeah, I think that's...
There's a fair number of people who are going to fold to just the Vine Mirror and Diverterus Gearhulk combo, right?
Yeah. I mean, like we've been talking about many times, like Vine Mare is so it's so hard to deal with once it's on the battlefield, especially if you can back it up a little bit, right? Like Ronus the Indomitable and Vine Mare together is that's like a solid combo.
Definitely.
Like Vine Mare turns on Ronus, and then Ronus can help keep Vine Mare alive.
Yeah. Dude, I don't know. I love Vine Mare. I mean, you do got to make sure you're on the offensive because Vine Mare, not that great of a defender. But I don't know. It just seems to me like it seems like an excellent card.
Yeah, I think
it's going to just, against random people, it's going to just accidentally work out well.
Yeah, I think that this is an interesting kind of extension of the Stompy archetype. Like, it's weird because it has cards like Greenbelt Rampager to say this, but like this is largely a green mid-range deck, not just like a mono offense deck, right? Like Vine Mare is a little clunky for just a mono Stompy deck, like, and Walking Ballista is an elegant weapon. I think it's like a lightsaber. It's not just like one of these. I have the heaviest hammer that I can hit you in the kneecap with, right? It only cost 1. I think that this deck has a lot of that kind of stuff going on. Like, if you look at a lot of the card choice from Atlanta Worlds and then on 2, Beckstrom's got Servant of the Conduit, right? Like, that's not just a mono offensive choice. Like, that's a choice for somebody who knows he's going to need to be setting up Commit to Memory later or cast Vine Mare faster. And it's a conscious choice because it's cutting down on how good Heart of Kiran can be in his deck, because like these are cards that aren't going to be able to crew Heart of Kiran easily. So in response, he just doesn't play as many. He's got only 2.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Like look at some version of this deck after sideboarding can be like Harvester, a bunch of counter spells, and Vivian Reed, right? Like that's his deck after sideboarding. He's just like, all right, I'm going to draw a little bit extra every turn, and then I'm going to counter your main thing, and I'm going to beat you with like 1 good creature and one vehicle or something, right? And then you'll be able to kill my guys, right? We agree. You can like fumigate me, or like get me with like a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1. But because I'm now relying on Vivian Reed and I've got Spell Pierce and Negate in my deck, I'm just going to protect Vivian Reed, and she's going to keep me in the game while you deal with 1 or 2 creatures at a time, and then I'm going to be able to stop your big spell because I've Commit to Memory also. Like I think like that's just his game plan sometimes, and that's a very compelling game plan, and it's not a stompy game plan.
No. Definitely a little bit of transformation action. But also just having that ability to switch speeds at all is already kind of a big step away from stompy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I really love, like, the green mid-range concept in Standard. Unfortunately, I just think that it's very difficult to choose which green mid-range cards that you want to play that would allow you to contend with a variety of red decks, at least 2 very distinct different red decks and the blue decks. Because, like, you can just be... my experience was I was just winning against the blue decks for, like, 6 or 7 turns, and then they crushed me in, like, 1 or 2 big turns. There wasn't anything I could do about it because it's just the cards just weren't in my deck, right? Like, just that's the thing that I think is challenging about playing green right now.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really tough once they're using the Scarab God or Torrential Gearhulk, even Teferi. Like the whole purpose of these blue decks. Once they do their thing, like obviously you look fine when they have to play their other cards, right?
Okay.
But like when they draw the Scarab God, Torrential Gearhulk, or Teferi, you just don't even have a way to really efficiently outclass that.
No, they've got cards like Glimmer of Genius so that if you just don't kill them for a turn, it just transforms their hand into whatever they needed. Or that's how it feels anyway. And then you're like, all right, the Scarab God with 1 open, and then you're like, all right, try to do my fancy thing. You're like, well, the 1 was obviously a Fatal Push. You're like, obviously. Like, yeah, so whatever your best thing was, it's mine now. Oh, no, I know how the Scarab God works. Like,
yeah, thanks for the refresher, though.
Yeah. That was fun. Yeah, look, you can't beat an active the Scarab God with some of these decks, and unfortunately, those decks are all optimized to kill small creatures. So they often get to the point that they have the Scarab God active.
So next week, what do you put? Oh, actually, there is one more standard deck I wanted to mention.
Oh yeah,
the Cynic Kim, who actually won the Classic this past weekend, did so with a basically mono green. One of those mono green with Scrap Heap Scrounger decks.
Yes.
And 4 Thorn Lieutenants. Just keeping it that much more. 3 Galta, 4 Thrashing Brontodon, just a lot more pure. Like
this is just like the purest version, right? 24 lands, no Adventurous Impulse,
and no main deck Vine Mares. Being just super low to the ground.
Oh yeah. I think that the purest version doesn't have Vine Mare in the main deck. It's not aggro enough.
Dude, what do you think of Nature's Way?
I don't know. It's got like a roaring monster on the. I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion of this card versus other things that do a similar thing. Like I don't know. Like it's just yep. You could play that, but your deck also has access to black, so I don't know why you would. Like,
dude, what about the lack of Verdurous Gearhulks, man?
Well, it's like. On the topic of the Nature's Way, like this version has got like 4 Woodland Cemetery and 4 Blooming Marsh. Wouldn't you just play like the Hour of Glory instead, which kills like a lot
is cheaper.
Of extraordinarily dangerous cards for your strategy? For example, the Scarab God or Hazoret instead of this card.
Is cheaper.
Yeah, I agree. But you know what's even cheaper than this? Blossoming Defense. You just play that. That does a similar thing also. Like
he's got those.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not... When I say I don't have an opinion of Nature's Way, I guess I do have an opinion of Nature's Way. I think it should be something along the lines of a Cast Down or more preferably Hour of Glory.
I don't know that you're wrong.
I mean...
Whatever.
When I think of Heroic Intervention, every time my opponent casts it, I'm kind of annoyed that I forgot that the card was in Standard. But I just would never play it personally. That's
I don't know. it's the part that's always so tough is that Settle the Wreckage is better than the White Sweepers right now anyway. And the last thing you want is Heroic Intervention against the Turbo Fog deck. So I think it's got its moments and its spots, but I'm not sure that that's right now.
Yeah, I had
it'd have to be a metagame call. You'd have to be confident in the amount of the amount of hard sweeping people are doing.
Yeah, I had a game yesterday where my opponent just makes swings with a bazillion things, and I'm like, this is obviously a desperation swing. I just make very good blocks for the battlefield, like letting in 6 or something. Heroic Interventions me, and I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna get destroyed. And then I actually only lost 1 or 2 creatures. I was like, wow, that was really much less impressive than it should have been. And then it just didn't advance the game at all, right? I think the fact that it can effectively counter a sweeper is cute, but it just doesn't even always work. The decks that have sweepers can get around this.
Yeah, that's part of the reason why I like the blue splash better than the black splash, is that if I want to stop sweepers, I want to do it with negate.
Yeah, but the thing that this deck has, which maybe is mitigated by the innovations like what Andrew did this week, is the mono green deck is just really an outstanding scrap heap scrounger deck. That's truly a thing that this strategy does well. And I think losing that for being the blue splash is a bit of offense that you might have wanted.
That's fair. Actually, I guess while we're on the mono green, there is one more. Daniel King top 16 with a green splash blue build that, in addition to the customary 2 commit memory, he actually had 3 main deck Cartouche of Knowledge. That was his other blue card.
Wow.
Just assembling the Vinemare Cartouche of Knowledge combo.
Well, it's the world's smartest Vinemares, I guess. Very knowledgeable.
It's kind of sweet.
Is that, is that a thing that you would want to do?
I don't know. I'd think about it. It sounds to me like probably not good enough in the way that matters, but it might be. I don't know.
It probably feels pretty good, when you've got that going. So
I just think the Cartouche Knowledge is better when the other person's playing a lot more creatures that block.
Yeah.
And as the format has shifted into a red decks and blue decks dynamic, there's a little bit less of that.
I agree. Or even a lot of the creature decks are just producing so much material on the ground. The minor advantages are ultimately meaningless. What you really want is more speed. If you're kind of going in the aggro direction, not more cleverness.
Yeah. Yep, I think you're right. Anyway, interesting times. The more, even though there's some pretty sharp variation between the red decks and some pretty big, differences from blue deck to blue deck, this reminds me of some of those old formats where there's 2 macro strategies. And then you just show up with some sort of a weird 4 McGee to the Lion deck or something and just hit the format from some weird angle that exploits how predictable 85% of your opponents, 90% of your opponents are.
Yeah. I've been thinking about that a lot. So far, I got to tell you, utter failure. The red decks are so good.
Yeah, I'm still on Soulless Red Black or Grixis if I want to have some fun.
It's not hard to beat. Not only is it not hard to beat just whatever the middle creature decks are in this format, it's comically easy to beat those decks if you want to. The problem is the red decks and the top end of the blue decks. You can beat any 2 of those 3. The problem is, so in order to win a tournament, you have to be able to beat all of those 3. And in order to do so, the best option is often just an archetype deck right now.
Yep. Well, it's a tough nut to crack. We'll see where it goes from here.
Doesn't mean we'll stop trying.
Dude, it's time to bring white back.
Yeah.
All right, man.
All right.
I think so. We're Dawnbringer next week.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play dredge for jail or hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Use your core trapped in amber stasis. We lost a lot of friends, got left behind.